Today, we're going to be looking at the Volkswagen Beetle. Now, the Beetle is one of the longest-lasting car nameplates in history, and most people think they know it, right?
Yes.
Cute little quirky,
Yeah, the Herbie car.
but there's so much more to its story than most people realize.
I bet.
And I think there are going to be some twists and turns that people will find really interesting.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into this.
So let's just get right to it. So to start, we need to go all the way back to the 1930s in Germany. This is under Nazi rule, and Hitler was pushing for this people's car, something that was affordable, practical, could get the masses around. And so he commissioned Ferdinand Porsche to create it.
Well, yeah, Porsche, that's a
Yeah.
big name even today, right?
Huge name. But what's really interesting here is that this idea of a people's car wasn't like a uniquely bad idea. A lot of countries around this time were trying to figure out, okay, how do we provide affordable mobility for our citizens?
Right, make it so everyone can have a car,
Yeah, exactly.
not just the wealthy.
But of course, in Nazi Germany, this project takes on a whole different meaning.
Much more sinister. If
And the factory that they ended up building for this car, which was in Wolfsburg, this would become like almost as iconic as the car itself. But then 1939, World War II breaks out. What do you think happens to the Beetle in all of this?
I mean, war breaks out, so I imagine any kind of civilian car production probably comes to a halt.
Yeah, everything gets thrown into chaos. And the factory, which was meant to churn out these people's cars, gets repurposed for the war effort. So instead of Beetles, they're making military vehicles, which is really a reminder of how ideals can get twisted
For sure.
during these times of conflict.
Yeah.
So after the war ends,
Okay.
Germany's in ruin, not just physically, but economically as well.
Right, so not the ideal place to be selling cars.
Yeah, especially a people's car. So what happens to the Beetle?
Well, you'd think that'd be it for it, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, Germany was devastated, and the factory itself was
right.
really damaged.
Yeah.
It became the symbol of their defeat and also this reminder of the Nazi regime. And a lot of people just wanted to forget anything associated with that time, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Including this people's car.
So how does the Beetle survive?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, you would think it would have just disappeared, but instead it flourishes. Well, this is where the story gets interesting. There was this British Army officer, Major Ivan Hurst. He was put in charge of overseeing the factory after the war. And, you would think that the story would be like, oh, they dismantled it or took it as part of reparations.
Right.
But he saw something different in this car.
Okay, so he saw potential
He did.
in this car that's connected to this defeated regime.
He realized that Germany needed industry. It needed jobs, and he thought that the Beetle could be the key to both of those things. So he pushed to restart production, not for the military this time,
Right.
but for civilians.
And this is 1945.
1945, yeah.
So resources are scarce,
Very.
and there's still a lot of suspicion
Oh, yeah.
toward Germany.
A lot.
So imagine this, a British officer in a defeated nation's factory trying to convince the world to buy a car that's linked to Hitler.
Talk about an uphill battle.
It's a hard sell. And there's a great story about this Dutch businessman named Ben Pon. In 1949, he tries to introduce the Beetle to the U.S. And he actually brought a Beetle over to New York.
He did.
To try to drum up interest.
Oh, wow.
And it was a total flop.
Real?
Total flop.
Why?
Because anti-German sentiment was so high that nobody wanted a German car. So Ben Pon ends up having to sell the Beetle that he brought over just to cover his hotel bill
Oh, man.
and get back home. It was a rough start for the Beetle in the U.S.
Yeah, that's a tough break.
But how does it eventually break into the American market?
It took another visionary. His name was Max Hoffman, and he got the import rights for the eastern U.S. But get this was in 1950, and Hoffman, he was already selling like these really fancy European cars, Porsches, Jaguars, that kind of thing. So how do you think he marketed the Beetle?
Did he try to make it seem like super glamorous or something?
No, not at all.
Okay.
He actually marketed it as like a practical and affordable alternative.
Okay.
Almost like an afterthought to the fancy cars he was selling. It's even said that he would sometimes tell dealers, hey, if you want those Porsches, you got to take a few of these Beetles too.
Oh, wow. So it was like a bonus car.
Kinda, yeah.
Okay.
Buy a Porsche, get a Beetle thrown in.
And this worked.
It did.
Really?
Yeah, no, it's surprising, right?
Yeah.
But the dealers found that the Beetles were actually pretty easy to sell. They were cheap to run, they were really reliable, and people started to realize that they were actually kind of charming. You know, they had that unique look,
Right.
unconventional. And then Volkswagen's marketing really kicked in.
Oh, yeah?
Do you remember those Think Small ads?
Oh, yeah, those were iconic.
They were brilliant.
Yeah.
They really played on the Beetle's small side and its fuel efficiency. It was perfect for the time. People were looking for something different, and Volkswagen gave it to them.
And it's kind of wild, right?
Yes, it is.
That this car that came from, such a dark period
Right.
became this symbol of peace
Mm.
and individuality. But we're just getting started.
Oh, we are.
Yeah, this little car has so much more to its story. We've got to talk about the technical innovation,
Oh, it is.
moments in pop culture,
Right.
and we can't forget about those dune buggies. Now, the Beetle may seem like a simple machine, but underneath that iconic shape lies a story of constant refinement. I mean, think about it. This car was in production for decades, and throughout all that time, Volkswagen was constantly tweaking and improving its design.
Oh, I had no idea.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty. What are some of the key technical milestones in the Beetle's evolution?
Well, we have to start with the engine. The earliest Beetles had a pretty modest amount of power.
Yeah.
I think it was around 25 horsepower.
25.
Yeah, which is actually,
Not a lot.
no, it's less than some lawnmowers you see today.
Wow.
But, back then it wasn't about speed.
Right.
It was about efficiency and reliability. And as technology advanced and what customers wanted started to change, Volkswagen, they gradually increased the engine size to get a little bit more power out of it. So by the mid-1960s,
Yeah.
the engine had grown to 1285 cc. And it was producing a much more respectable 50 horsepower. A little bit better.
A little bit better, yeah.
But they didn't just make the engine bigger. There were other big changes. Think about it. The Beetle's basic architecture, it didn't really change that much.
Right.
But it still had to keep up with all the new safety and performance standards. So in 1951, they introduced hydraulic brakes, which was a huge step forward from the cable-operated brakes they had before.
I'm sure that made a big difference.
It did.
For drivers.
Yeah, not just in stopping power, but also just the effort it took to actually stop the car. And then in 1961, they came out with a fully synchronized transmission, which made changing gears a lot smoother and more user-friendly. But one of the most significant improvements came in 1968 when they introduced double-jointed rear axle.
Double-jointed rear axle.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really know what that means.
So this is going to get a little technical, but I think it's important to understand. So the Beetle originally had a swing axle suspension system. Imagine like a simple hinge on each side.
Okay.
It was really simple, but it had some handling problems. So under certain conditions, the wheels could tuck in, and that could lead to oversteer.
Which is bad.
Which could be dangerous, Like imagine taking a corner too fast and suddenly the back end of the car wants to swing out. Not ideal.
No.
So this double-jointed axle, it fixed that. They actually took the design from the VW microbus and it added these extra joints so that the wheels could move more in a more controlled way, which made the Beetle handle way better. It was much safer and more predictable, especially in, tough driving situations.
So it was a safety upgrade and a performance upgrade.
It was both.
That's cool.
Yeah, and it's a great example of how Volkswagen was always looking for ways to improve the Beetle, even while keeping that, same basic design.
Totally. And speaking of innovation, they also experimented with some pretty unconventional ideas, like the automatic stick shift transmission that they introduced in 1968.
An automatic stick shift?
Yeah, it's a little bit of an odd one.
How does that even work?
So imagine a 4-speed manual transmission, but they took out the first gear.
Okay.
And they added a torque converter.
So you still had to shift gears?
You did.
But it was automatic.
Yeah, it's a little confusing.
Yeah, that's a little weird.
It was this unique approach, for sure, and the clutch was vacuum operated. So it would disengage automatically when you moved the shifter. You would just pick the gear, let go, and the system would do the rest.
So it's like a semi-automatic?
Yeah, kind of a halfway point
Okay.
between fully manual and fully automatic.
Interesting.
And Car and Driver actually tested it back then.
They did.
And they found it wasn't actually much slower than the regular Beetle. But it never really caught on.
I can see why.
It was a little too quirky for most people. But, you know, not every innovation is a hit.
Sure.
But it's cool that Volkswagen was willing to experiment, try new things, even with a car as iconic as the Beetle. Shows they weren't afraid to think outside the box.
For sure.
But let's move beyond what was going on under the hood, because the Beetle's impact goes way beyond its standard form. Think about the dune buggies.
Oh, yeah.
Herbie, the love bug.
The love bug.
It became a cultural icon. So let's shift gears a bit and dive into that side of the Beetle's legacy, the Myers-Manx dune buggy.
Yeah.
It's like the ultimate symbol of, you know, beach cruising freedom. And what's really interesting is that it was essentially a kit car. You could take a regular Beetle, strip it down to its chassis, engine, transmission, and with this Myers-Manx kit, you could transform it into this off-road machine. So the Beetle was like the ultimate blank canvas for car enthusiasts.
That's awesome.
And then, of course, there's
a Herbie,
the star of Disney's The Love Bug movies.
Yeah.
This self-driving, race-winning Beetle.
I love Herbie.
It really captured the hearts of millions. It just solidified the car's place in pop culture. I mean, he was like a character in his own right. It's amazing how the Beetle, it went beyond just being a car. It became this symbol of personality and even a bit of magic.
Totally.
So it's really fascinating to think about how this car that was born in this time of conflict and was designed to be purely practical evolved into this beloved icon with such a rich cultural legacy.
It's amazing.
It really is a testament to its adaptability and its enduring appeal. And we're not done yet.
What else is there?
We've explored its past, its evolution, its cultural impact, but what about its future?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah, could we see a Beetle resurgence?
I don't know.
Maybe even an electric Beetle. But there's this one big question
Okay.
we haven't really addressed.
What is it?
Why?
Why what?
Why this car? With its unconventional looks and a history tied to, you know, a pretty dark chapter. Why did this car become such a global phenomenon?
That is the question, isn't it? A lot of people have tried to figure that out. I think it's a mix of things. It's practical, affordable, and has a touch of magic.
So practicality, the Beetle was known for being reliable, fuel efficient.
Especially after the war. Those were big selling points. People needed a car they could count on, something that wouldn't break down all the time, and something that wouldn't cost a fortune to run.
And the Beetle fit that bill perfectly. And it wasn't just about, you know, getting from point A to point B.
Right.
It was about doing it affordably.
Exactly. It was designed to be a people's car, accessible to everyone.
Yeah, it was the original entry-level car, but it was more than just a cheap set of wheels.
It became a symbol. It showed you didn't need excess. You could embrace simplicity, and it let you express your individuality.
And the marketing, those Think Small ads.
Oh, those were brilliant. They really captured the zeitgeist. They took what some people saw as weaknesses and turned them into strengths.
Yeah, it was like the Beetle became this blank canvas
for
self-expression.
Yeah, paint it, accessorize it.
Make it your own.
Exactly.
And then you have the nostalgia factor.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the Beetle...
It brings back memories of road trips, of summer days, of a simpler time.
It really does.
It's a car that has touched so many lives, created memories for generations.
And that's the magic. This car that goes beyond just being a car.
It transcends its physical form.
Yeah, it becomes something more.
It represents freedom, adventure, those simpler times you were talking about.
It does. So, looking ahead, do you think there's a place for the Beetle in the future?
I don't know. That's a tough one. The car world is changing so fast. Electric cars, sustainability, it's all anyone's talking about.
The Beetle's core values, simplicity, affordability, efficiency, they kind of align with all that.
They do, yeah.
Imagine an electric Beetle.
Oh, wow.
Zipping around.
Yeah.
Same iconic shape, but powered by clean energy. It would be a cool blend of nostalgia and innovation.
I think Volkswagen should do it.
It would be a bold move for sure.
It would.
But it could be brilliant.
It could capture a whole new generation of fans, people who care about the environment, but also want a bit of that classic charm. And it would appeal to those of us who grew up with the original. It would be like a little piece of our childhoods.
But whether we see a new Beetle or not, one thing's for sure, its legacy is secure.
It is.
This is one of the most iconic cars
Oh, absolutely.
of all time.
Definitely.
And its story,
Yeah.
from its start in wartime Germany to its global status as this symbol of peace. It really shows the power of ingenuity, of resilience, and even a little bit of luck.
You gotta have a little luck.
You do.
Sometimes.
And it reminds us that even in dark times,
Yeah.
amazing things can happen. So who knows? Maybe someday we'll be back,
That would be great.
exploring a new chapter
A new chapter?
in the Beetle story.
I would love that.
But for now, we've reached the end of our Volkswagen Beetle deep dive.
I've really enjoyed this.
Me too. It's been a blast.
It has.
Thanks for coming along for the ride.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring,
Yes.
keep learning,
Always.
and keep those engines revving.
Yeah.